My name is Harold Mackenzie. I'm 63 years old, a retired civil engineer from Oakville, Ontario, and for the last 4 months, I've been sleeping on a cot in my own son's garage. Not the finished part, the cold, uninsulated half where he kept his snowblower and his wife's old boxes of university textbooks. They didn't know I'd already spoken to my solicitor. They didn't know that the morning my son stood in the kitchen and told me I was making his wife uncomfortable, I had quietly started putting things in motion, things they were never going to see coming. Let me go back to the beginning because none of this started with the garage. It started 18 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon in February when my son called me from his car on the way home from work. His voice was careful, the way it gets when he wants something. Not upset, not excited. Just measured, controlled. He said his wife had been doing some thinking. He said the house, my house, the split level on Lakeshore I'd lived in for 26 years, the one where I raised him after his mother and I divorced, was too big for one person. He said they'd been looking at real estate, and with the market the way it was, a property like mine in Oakville could sell for well over $1 million, maybe more. My son's name is Trevor. He's 37 years old and works in project management for a tech firm downtown. He's not a bad person, or at least I used to believe he wasn't. He has a good face, the kind that makes people trust him right away. He got that from his mother. His wife's name is Simone. Simone is 34. She grew up in the Annex in Toronto, went to Western, and has worked in marketing for as long as I've known her. She speaks the way people do when they've spent a lot of time convincing other people of things. She's always had a particular way of looking at me, not rude, exactly. More like the way you look at a piece of furniture you didn't pick but have to keep in the house. Trevor's pitch that February afternoon was actually quite good. He explained it like a business proposal. I would sell the Lakeshore house. The proceeds, roughly $1.35 million after commissions and fees, would go toward purchasing a larger property together. They'd found a place in Burlington, newer construction, 5 bedrooms, a proper finished basement suite, with its own side entrance, a full bathroom, a kitchenette. You'd have your own space, Dad, he said. You'd never be lonely. We're going to start a family soon, and you'd be right there, for all of it. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I talked to my friend Len, who told me to think very carefully. I talked to my solicitor, a sharp woman named Patricia Ng, who had handled my divorce and had known me for 15 years. Patricia looked at me over the rim of her glasses and said, "Harold, if you do this, we are going to structure it so carefully that they will not be able to sneeze in that house without your permission." So, we did it carefully. We set up a family trust, the Mackenzie Family Trust. The Lakeshore house sold for $1.41 million. I transferred the net proceeds into the trust, and the trust purchased the Burlington property outright, free and clear, no mortgage. Trevor and Simone's names were on the deed to the structure, but the land, and the trust deed was explicit about this, the land remained the sole property of the Mackenzie Family Trust, meaning me. Patricia had added a clause. She called it the standard restriction. In plain language, it meant Trevor and Simone could not place any new financial claim against the property. No second mortgage, no line of credit secured against the house, no equity loans, without my written consent. If they violated that clause, the land lease could be terminated. And if the lease was terminated, they had 60 days to remove the structure from my land, or the structure defaulted to the trust. Trevor had skimmed it. Simone had not read it at all. I watched them sign. We moved in together in early April. The first few months were fine, or close enough to fine that I told myself it was fine. I had the basement suite. It was exactly as advertised, big, bright, with a proper egress window that looked out onto the garden. I'd brought some of my furniture from the Lakeshore house, my drafting table, my books, the photograph of my late father on the Bruce Trail that had hung in my study for 20 years. I cooked my own meals. I stayed out of their way. I came upstairs for Sunday dinners. It felt, in those first months, like it might actually work. Then autumn came, and things shifted. Small things at first. The recycling bin moved from beside the side door to behind the garage, which meant a longer walk for me in the cold. My parking spot in the driveway disappeared one weekend when Simone's sister visited, and never really came back. One Sunday dinner became every other Sunday, then once a month. Trevor started answering my texts with one word. I told myself they were busy. I told myself I was being oversensitive, the way people do when they don't want to admit what they're actually seeing. What I was actually seeing was that Simone had decided she didn't want me in the house. She never said it directly, she's too smart for that. It came out in other ways. A comment about how my cooking smells lingered in the upstairs hallway through the shared ventilation. A gentle suggestion that maybe I should use the side entrance exclusively to give them a bit more privacy. A conversation Trevor relayed to me one Saturday morning, standing in my kitchen doorway with his coffee, not quite meeting my eyes, telling me that Simone had been feeling a little crowded and they were wondering if I'd given any thought to maybe eventually looking at seniors' residences. Not a nursing home, Dad, just like a nice condo community. Independent living. You'd have your own people. I was 63 years old. I'd run field operations on the Niagara Tunnel project. I did not need my own people. I said that to Trevor. He said he understood. He apologized. He said Simone didn't mean it the way it came out. He said we'd figure it out. 2 weeks later, he came downstairs again. This time, he didn't look apologetic. He looked rehearsed. He stood in the middle of my living room, the living room I'd furnished, in the home my $1.41 million had purchased. And he told me that he and Simone were planning to expand, that they wanted to use my suite as a home office and eventual nursery, that they'd spoken to a contractor about converting the garage. It'll be really comfortable, Dad. We'll insulate it properly, put in a heater. It's actually a great space. I looked at my son. Trevor, I said, there are 3 bedrooms upstairs. He had an answer ready. The first was their room. The second was going to be the nursery. The third was Simone's home office, and she needed it for client calls, and the noise level in the rest of the house was Trevor, I said again. Dad, this isn't up for debate, he said. He said, we need the space, this is our house. That's when I knew. Not just that things had gone wrong. I'd known that for months. I knew completely and clearly exactly what this was and exactly what I had to do. I moved into the garage that weekend. I did it quietly, without arguing. I borrowed a folding cot from Len, who lived 20 minutes away and who had offered, more than once, to let me stay in his guest room. I told him I wasn't ready to leave yet. I needed to understand what was happening in that house. The garage was attached to the house but unheated. A small electric baseboard heater had been installed, which kept the temperature at roughly 10 degrees above whatever it was outside. In December in Burlington, that is not warm. I slept in a sleeping bag on top of the cot. I brushed my teeth at the utility sink beside the washer and dryer. I kept my kettle on a piece of plywood, balanced across 2 sawhorses because there was no counter space. Upstairs, I could hear them, not always the words, just the sound of a life going on without me. The television, the laughter, the clink of glasses. Simone had wasted no time repainting my old suite. I could smell the primer from the garage. I did not sleep well in that garage. But I watched and I listened, and I thought. I started collecting the mail before Simone could. She had gotten into the habit of scooping it up when she left for the gym in the mornings, and I'd noticed she'd occasionally bring the whole stack inside and leave it on the kitchen counter in a way that made it hard to separate what was mine from what was theirs. One morning in early January, I was up before 6, and I went out to the box in my bathrobe in 15 below wind chill. There was a letter in there, white envelope, window cut out. The logo in the corner said TD Bank. It was addressed to Trevor and Simone Mackenzie. I held it in my cold hands. I knew I shouldn't open it. It was their mail. Then I thought about what had happened to my father's books, which I'd carried out of my suite in a cardboard box and stacked in the corner of the garage because there was no room anywhere else. I thought about the photograph of him on the Bruce Trail, wrapped in an old towel, because I had nowhere to hang it. I opened the letter. It was a rejection notice. TD Bank regretted to inform Trevor and Simone Mackenzie that their application for a home equity line of credit in the amount of $185,000 had been declined. $185,000. I read the letter 3 times in the grey January dark, standing in the driveway in my bathrobe. My breath was coming out in clouds. I thought about Patricia Ing and the standard restriction clause. I thought about what a line of credit secured against the house would mean. I thought about Simone's car, the Audi Q7 she'd gotten last spring, which Trevor had told me they'd financed through the dealership. I thought about the renovation invoices I'd seen on the kitchen counter, not for the garage conversion but for a kitchen remodel, waterfall quartz countertops, custom cabinetry, probably $60,000–$70,000 at least. They were in serious financial trouble, and they had just tried to borrow against my land. I went back inside. I put the letter in my jacket pocket. I sat on the edge of the cot in the cold garage, and I called Patricia. She answered on the second ring, because Patricia Ing is the kind of solicitor who answers on the second ring. I told her everything. The garage, the suite, the rejection letter, the standard restriction. She listened without interrupting, which is another thing Patricia does well. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Harold, they filed a credit application using the Burnington property as security. That is a direct violation of the trust deed and the restriction clause." "Yes," I said. "I can have the default notice prepared today." "I know," I said. "Don't send it yet." Another pause. "Why?" I looked around the cold garage, the sawhorses, the kettle, the racked photograph of my father. "Because I need to understand the whole picture first," I said. "They didn't try to borrow $185,000 to renovate a kitchen. That kind of desperation comes from somewhere, and I want to know where before I pull the trigger." Patricia said, "Harold, you're sitting in a garage in January." "I'm aware," I said. "What exactly are you waiting for?" "Evidence," I said. What I got was more than I expected. I had spent 40 years as a civil engineer. I know how to observe a site without drawing attention to myself. Over the next 2 weeks, I paid attention differently. I noticed that Simone took phone calls on the back deck regardless of the temperature, always in the same spot by the fence, always with her back to the house. I noticed that Trevor had started leaving for work earlier and coming home later, but he didn't seem happier or more rested. He seemed frightened. One night, around 11:30, I got up for water. The garage door that connected to the mudroom was thin, and I could sometimes hear conversations in the kitchen. I stood in the dark and I listened. Simone's voice, low and quick. She was on the phone. "The application came back declined," she said. I know, it's because of the trust structure. His solicitor buried it in there. We didn't." A pause. "That doesn't matter now. We need to move to the other option." Another pause, longer this time. "If we list it privately, without going through the trust, Trevor's name is on the deed. Just Trevor's. We can." She stopped. Something the other person said. Then quieter, "He's in the garage, Marcus. He's not going to find out. He barely leaves the garage." "Marcus. He's not going to find out. He barely leaves the garage." I stood in the dark and I filed that name away. "The equity is there," she continued. "If we sell privately at market, we clear enough to pay what we owe Marcus and still have enough for the down payment on the Muskoka property, but we have to move fast. Trevor is." She made a sound impatient, dismissive. "Trevor is manageable. He does what I need him to do." I went back to my cot. I lay in the sleeping bag in the dark and I thought about my son. Manageable. I thought about the way he'd been looking lately, pale and tired, not quite present. I thought about how, every time I'd tried to have a real conversation with him in the last 2 months, he'd deflected, not unkindly, just constantly. I'd assumed he was avoiding me out of guilt. Now I wasn't sure the guilt was even his. The next morning, I called Patricia back and told her about Marcus, about the Muskoka property, about selling privately. She went very quiet in a different way than before. "Harold," she said, "if they attempt to list and sell that property without the trust's consent, they are not just violating the restriction clause. They are attempting to commit fraud against the trust." "I know," I said. "We don't just have grounds to terminate the lease," she said. "We potentially have grounds for criminal referral." I let that sit for a moment. "Prepare everything," I said. "The default notice, the full documentation of the restriction violation, all of it. Have it ready. I'll tell you when." Then I called Len and told him I was coming to stay for a few nights. He didn't ask questions. That's what a 40-year friendship looks like. I left on a Wednesday morning. I packed one bag, my good clothes, my laptop, the wrapped photograph of my father. I waited until Trevor had left for work and Simone was on the back deck with her coffee. Then I walked through the mudroom, up to the kitchen, and I waited. She came in from the cold, saw me, and her expression went through about 4 things in 1 second before settling on careful surprise. "Harold, you're up early." "I've been thinking," I said. I kept my voice low and tired and a little defeated, which was not entirely acting. "I think you're right. I think this arrangement isn't working. I'm not comfortable here, and I can see it's hard on you and Trevor." She had very good control over her face, but her eyes gave something away. A flicker, almost like relief. "I have a friend in Guelph," I continued. "Old colleague. He's been asking me to come visit." "I think I'll go up for a while, give everyone some space." Simone set her mud down. She looked at me with something that might have been the most genuine warmth she'd ever directed at me. "Harold, I think that's a wonderful idea. Honestly, you deserve to relax. You've been through a lot." "I have," I said. "How long do you think you'll be gone?" I picked up my bag. "I'm not sure. A few weeks. Maybe longer." She walked me to the door. She was almost glowing. I drove to Len's house in Mississauga, called Patricia from the driveway, and told her to send the default notice by registered mail and process server. That afternoon, Patricia laughed, not her usual dry chuckle, but a real, full laugh. "With pleasure," she said. Then I took a drive. Not to Guelph. I drove north on the 400 and then east, up through the trees and the frozen lakes, until I reached a small town on the south shore of Georgian Bay. A friend of Patricia's, a real estate agent named Anne, brisk and practical, who wore fleece and drove a 4-wheel drive, had sent me a listing 2 days earlier. It was a year-round property on the water. Not grand. Solid. Built in the 1980s by an engineer. I could tell by the bones, the way the weight was distributed, the quality of the foundation. 3 bedrooms, a screened porch facing the water, a wood dock. The lot was heavily treed and the nearest neighbour was a quarter-kilometre away. The asking price was $895,000. The owners were motivated. I walked through it alone while Anne waited outside. I stood in the main room and looked out at the bay, grey and frozen, the far shore, a dark line of spruce. The light was the particular low white light of a January afternoon in Ontario, cold and clear and honest. I thought about my house in Oakville, about the 26 years I'd spent there, about my son as a boy bringing home a garter snake in his jacket pocket, about driving him to hockey at 5 in the morning, both of us half asleep, the town still dark, about the person I'd thought he was. I thought about Simone saying Trevor is manageable. I went outside and told Anne I wanted to make an offer. Cash. Full ask. She gave me a look not unlike the one the valet had given Benjamin Coleman, that quick recalibration when the person in front of you doesn't match the number they just said. I didn't explain. I just asked her to call Patricia. We signed the offer that evening. 2 days later, back at Len's, my phone began to vibrate on the table. I was in the middle of a bowl of soup. I watched it rattle twice before I picked it up. Trevor. I let it ring through. I finished the soup. Then I called back. He answered before the first ring was done. "Dad." His voice was strangled. "Dad, someone served us papers today. There's a notice that says the land lease is being terminated. What does that mean? What is that?" "It means exactly what it says," I told him. "I don't understand. We didn't do anything." "We didn't, TD Bank, Trevor." Silence. The application for the home equity line of credit. $185,000, secured against the Burlington property, which is built on land owned by the Mackenzie Family Trust, which means it required my written consent, which you did not obtain. Very long silence. "How did you know about that?" "Trevor," I said. "I'm a civil engineer. I spent 40 years reading documents that would kill you if you got them wrong. Did you really think I didn't read what I signed?" I heard him exhale. A sharp, broken sound. "Dad, that was Simone's idea. I told her we should ask you first, and she said, 'I know,' I said. And then, before he could turn this into something simple, I said, I also know about Marcus. The silence this time was different, heavier. She told you. No one told me anything. I was in that garage for 4 months, Trevor. You'd be surprised what you hear from a garage. I could hear him breathing. Short, shallow breaths. She was planning to sell the house, I said. Without the trust's consent. A private listing. Pay off whatever you owe this Marcus. Use the rest as a down payment on a Muskoka property. I paused. And then divorce you. She had the math worked out. The sound he made was not something I can describe easily. It wasn't crying exactly. It was the sound of a man realizing that the last several years of his life had been a different story than the one he thought he was living. She's gone, he said finally. I showed her the notice. She read it, went upstairs and came back down with her bags. She didn't yell. She said this was your fault. She said I was pathetic for not standing up to you, and then she left. I looked out Len's kitchen window at the cold backyard. Does she know about Marcus? I asked. I knew, he said quietly. Not everything, but I knew there was someone. I didn't want to. I told myself I was wrong. He stopped, started again. I think I've been telling myself a lot of things. Yes, I said, I think you have. Trevor was quiet for a while. Then, Dad, what happens to the house? The notice says 60 days. I can't move a house. You know I can't move a house. No, I said, you can't. So it goes to the trust. It goes to the trust. He absorbed that. I waited. Where will I go? I looked at the photograph of my father I'd propped up on Len's mantel. An old man on a rocky trail, squinting into the sun, looking like he had somewhere to be. I bought a place, I said, on Georgian Bay. It's smaller than the Burlington house. A lot smaller. But there's a spare room. Nothing from him. It's not a gift, I said. Not yet. You'd stay as a guest and you'd earn your way. There's work to be done on the property. Dock needs attention. The west wall of the garage needs reframing. The septic needs to be inspected. You'll work. You'll pay for your own things. You'll call Marcus and deal with whatever it is you owe him on your own because that is your debt and not mine. Dad, I'm not finished, I said. I love you. You are my son, and I love you the way I've loved you since the moment I saw your face in that hospital room. That does not change, but what happened in that house, what you let happen, what you went along with, what you chose not to see, that's not something I can pretend away. We don't get to skip past it. We walk through it, slowly, and we see what's on the other side. Another long pause. Okay, he said. His voice was very small. Okay, I said. The Burlington house listed through Patricia's referral agent in February. The market that winter was slow, but the property was quality. Good bones, that kitchen Simone had renovated. A large lot. It sold in 6 weeks for $1.28 million. Patricia paid out the various costs and the small remaining balance on a personal line of credit Trevor hadn't mentioned to me. When the dust cleared, just over $1 million went back into the Mackenzie family trust. I didn't recover everything, but I recovered enough. Trevor arrived at the Georgian Bay property on a Saturday in early March. The ice on the bay was still thick enough to walk on. He got out of his car and stood in the driveway, looking at the house, and then at the water beyond it, and then at me, and I could see him trying to figure out what to say. He didn't say anything. He just went to the trunk and got out his bag. That was enough for now. Those first weeks were quiet. We ate simple meals. We worked on the dock in the cold, wearing heavy gloves, not talking much, just working. In the evenings I read, and he made phone calls, dealing, I assumed, with Marcus and whatever that situation was. He didn't ask me for help with it, and I didn't offer. That was the agreement. One evening in late March, he came out to the porch where I was sitting with tea, watching the ice begin to break up along the shore. He sat in the other chair, and we watched it together for a while. She called, he said finally. Simone. She wants to know if she can come get some things she left in storage. That's between you and her, I said. He nodded, picked at the arm of the chair. I've been thinking about what you said, he told me. About walking through it slowly and seeing what's on the other side. He looked at the bay. I don't know if I'm capable of being the person I should have been. None of us know that until we try, I said. The ice shifted and cracked somewhere out in the middle of the bay. The sound carried a long way in the cold air. "You really read everything you signed, didn't you?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Every word," I said. He was quiet again. Then something that might have been the beginning of a laugh, dry and sad and real. "Why didn't you tell me?" I picked up my tea. I was hoping I wouldn't have to. What I know now that I wish I'd understood 20 years ago is this. The most generous thing you can do for someone you love is not to smooth the path in front of them. It is to make sure there is a path at all. I handed my son a safety net and he stood on it and threw his father into the basement. But the safety net was the wrong structure. What I should have built was a wall, one he could lean against, but one that was mine, that he could not take from me. The trust was the wall. He's still here. He got a contract position with a firm in Barrie, remote work, enough to get back on his feet slowly. He pays for his own groceries. He fixed the west wall of the garage without being asked. On Sunday mornings he makes coffee and leaves a cup outside my door, which is a small thing but which I have come to look forward to more than I expected. I hung my father's photograph on the wall of the main room, in the light that comes off the bay in the mornings, and every day I walk past it and think about what it means to build something that lasts, not a house, not a contract, not a bank account, something with better bones than any of that, something worth passing on. There's a photograph of my father on the wall of my house on Georgian Bay. He's on a rocky stretch of the Bruce Trail, squinting into the sun, leaning slightly forward like he's got somewhere to be. I've looked at that photograph almost every day of my adult life, and I never fully understood it until I was sleeping on a cot in a garage in January, listening to my son's television through a thin wall. What I understand now is that my father was not a man who waited for other people to give him permission to keep going. He just kept going. That's not a small thing. I used to think it was stubbornness. Now I think it was something much harder to come by. The kind of steadiness that doesn't come from certainty, but from knowing who you are even when the people closest to you have stopped seeing it. I gave Trevor everything I had. The house, the money, the proximity. I thought that was love. And it was, partly, but it was also, if I'm honest, a kind of avoidance. I didn't want to watch my son struggle. I didn't want to be the father who held things back. So I handed it all over, and in doing so I handed over the one thing that would have protected both of us, the boundary, the wall, the honest, clear line between generosity and surrender. Simone saw that missing line before I did. That's not a comfortable thing to admit. She looked at our arrangement and understood immediately that there was nothing stopping her from taking more. She wasn't wrong, structurally. She was only wrong morally, and in this situation, by the time morality becomes visible, the structure has already failed. What I'm most grateful for, sitting here now watching the ice come off the bay, is that Patricia made me put the clause in, not because it saved the money, though it did, but because it saved the relationship. If I'd had no legal ground to stand on, I would have eventually left the garage with nothing. Trevor would have let it happen. He would have chosen her over me, not out of malice, but out of weakness, the particular weakness of a man who has never had to discover what he's made of. The clause forced a confrontation that needed to happen. It forced my son to look at what he'd agreed to, and to look at what had been done to him. That's the thing about doing right by people. It doesn't always feel like rescue in the moment. Sometimes it looks like consequences. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do for someone you love is let the structure you built do what it was designed to do, and trust that they're capable of rebuilding themselves on the other side of it. Trevor fixed the garage wall without being asked. He did it properly, the way I would have done it, measuring twice before he cut anything. I watched him from the porch and didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Some things get passed down in the hands, not the mouth. I don't know what we'll look like in 5 years. I don't know if the trust will hold, the rebuilt kind, not the legal one, but I know that every morning there's a cup of coffee outside my door, and every morning I pick it up, and every morning that feels like a small and deliberate choice we're both making. That's enough. That's more than I had 6 months ago. I'm 63 years old. I know how to read a contract. And I'm finally learning, only now, how to read a relationship the same way, not with suspicion, but with care, with eyes open, with the patience to understand what you're actually signing up for before you hand anyone the pen.